What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was betrayed by his family and reborn in a galaxy of war? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto sat by the window in his small, barren room, the cold light of the moon casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The bandages wrapped around his body felt tight and uncomfortable, but they were necessary to cover the wounds inflicted by the villagers. His aching body served as a grim reminder of the attack he barely survived a few days ago, an attack orchestrated by people he thought were his friends. Yakuma and Satsuki. Their names left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had trusted them, laughed with them, and believed that they saw him as more than the demon brat the village labeled him as. But it had all been a lie, a cruel joke. They had lured him into a trap, pretending to befriend him, only to lead him into the hands of an angry mob. They thought it was just a harmless prank. Naruto barely escaped with his life. He clenched his fists tightly, the bandages stretching against his knuckles. He could still hear their laughter, their carefree excuses, as if his pain meant nothing. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't a joke. It was betrayal. Naruto turned his gaze to the empty room around him. No decorations, no warmth, no signs of a life worth celebrating. It was his birthday today, or more accurately, it was their birthday. Menma and Naomi's birthday. The siblings who had everything: attention, love, training, praise. And he had nothing. It all began years ago when Jiraiya, the supposed Toad Sage, came to his parents with a prophecy. The prophecy spoke of a child destined to bring balance to the world, a savior. Kushina and Minato were quick to believe it was Menma and Naomi, the twins who each held half of Kurama's chakra. Naruto, who contained the fox's soul, was deemed irrelevant. Since that day, his parents had ignored him, pouring all their love and attention into Menma and Naomi. They never celebrated his birthdays, never acknowledged his accomplishments, never noticed his pain. He was a ghost in his own home. He rested his head against the window, his sharp blue eyes reflecting the village below. He had long since stopped hoping for their attention or approval. Instead, he focused on something else: knowledge. Naruto had spent years studying in secret, delving into Konoha's history, its darkest secrets, and its forbidden techniques. He devoured books on Fuinjutsu, memorized every scroll he could find, and trained in skills far beyond what anyone imagined. His parents didn't teach him. The village didn't help him. He had taught himself everything, driven by a quiet determination to survive and prove that he didn't need anyone. There was one exception: Anko Mitarashi, the woman who had been abandoned by his mother, her former sensei, after Orochimaru branded her with the cursed seal. Anko understood what it felt like to be cast aside, and she treated Naruto with kindness when no one else did. She didn't see him as a monster, just a kid trying to survive. Her small gestures of humanity meant the world to him. But even Anko's kindness couldn't erase the bitterness he felt toward the village or his so-called family. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he thought about the day ahead. He had a theory about what would happen. He had lived long enough, observed people long enough, to predict their actions. He knew his parents would throw a grand celebration for Menma and Naomi. The villagers would cheer, shower them with gifts, and sing their praises. And no one, not one person, would remember that today was also his birthday. And he didn't care. Naruto stood, his bandaged body moving stiffly as he crossed the room to a small, hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Pulling it open, he revealed a collection of scrolls, seals, and a few essential supplies he had gathered in secret. Tonight wasn't just another night of neglect and loneliness. Tonight, he would leave. He had stayed in Konoha for far too long, enduring the hatred and abuse, hoping against hope that things would change. But now, he saw the truth. Konoha didn't deserve him. His parents didn't deserve him. He would leave the elemental nations behind and forge his own path, far from their expectations, far from their lies. "I don't need them," he whispered to himself, his voice cold and resolute. "I never did." Tonight, Naruto Uzumaki would disappear. And one day, they would all realize what they had lost. By then, it would be far too late. Naruto descended the stairs silently, his presence barely noticed in the chaotic din of the grand celebration. The grand hall was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the sycophantic praises of the clan heads and their children. Banners adorned the walls with Menma and Naomi's names, proclaiming them as the village's prodigies and future leaders. Naruto stayed in the shadows, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the spectacle before him. His gaze darkened as he observed Minato and Kushina standing proudly beside Menma and Naomi. They wore smiles that he hadn't seen directed toward him in years. His hands clenched into fists, the nails digging into his palms. Amid the celebration, the only person who noticed his presence was Satsuki. Her dark eyes flicked toward him briefly, but she said nothing, a flicker of guilt flashing across her face before she turned her attention back to the crowd. Minato raised his hand to quiet the room, a triumphant smile on his face. Today, not only do we celebrate the birthdays of my beloved children, Menma and Naomi, but I am proud to announce that they will inherit their positions as future clan heads of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. The room erupted in applause, cheers, and congratulations. Naruto's glare intensified as he stepped forward into the light, his expression cold and unyielding. His voice cut through the commotion, calm but laced with venom. Just like that, huh? The applause stopped abruptly. Heads turned toward him, confusion and shock painting their faces. Kushina frowned, tilting her head. "What do you mean, Naruto?" she asked, her tone uncertain. Naruto's smirk was razor-sharp as he locked eyes with her. "It's Kushina. You lost the right to call me your son a long time ago." Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and hurt crossing her face. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Minato's jaw tightened, but he remained composed, though a flicker of unease betrayed his calm exterior. "What are you talking about?" Kushina pressed, her voice trembling slightly. "You mean you don't know?" Naruto's voice dripped with mockery. "You and your precious husband disowned me years ago. Or was it just so insignificant to you that you forgot?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kushina's face paled, and Minato's frown deepened. Before either could respond, Naruto raised a hand, cutting them off. "Don't bother denying it. I know why you trained them," he spat, pointing at Menma and Naomi. "It's because of that prophecy. That pathetic old toad whispered in your ears about a destined savior, and you both decided it was them. You never even gave me a chance." "That's not true," Minato started, but Naruto silenced him with a glare. "Cut the bullshit," Naruto snarled. His voice echoed through the hall, making everyone flinch. "You never trained me. You never even looked my way. You left me to rot while you showered them with everything. And now, you expect me to just sit back and applaud your little announcements?" Naruto extended his hands, revealing two glowing spheres of energy, one a swirling mass of wind and the other of water. The twin Rasengans hummed with power, casting an eerie light across the room. The sight left Minato visibly stunned. His eyes widened, his lips parting as he struggled to process what he was seeing. "That's impossible. I never trained me?" Naruto finished for him, his smirk widening. "No, you didn't. But I trained myself. While you were busy coddling those two, I mastered what you couldn't. So don't you dare tell me I don't have potential. You never even gave me the chance to prove it." "Naruto, Minato began, his tone conciliatory, but Naruto interrupted him again with a mocking laugh. "Save your apologies," he sneered. "You made your choice. Menma and Naomi are the children of prophecy, right? But let me tell you something." He turned to the twins, his expression full of disdain. "They don't look strong to me. They're just overhyped broads, bloated with power that isn't even theirs. That chakra you gave them? It's nothing but a temporary boost. It won't last, and when it fails, they'll crumble." Kushina's eyes narrowed at his words. "What are you saying?" Before Naruto could answer, Menma stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Shut up, loser," he shouted, puffing his chest out. "I'm the child of prophecy. I'm destined for greatness, and you're nothing. I'll put you in your place." Menma lunged at Naruto, but his confidence evaporated in an instant. Naruto's foot connected with his stomach in a blur of motion, sending him flying through the kitchen wall. Menma's body crashed into the backyard, skidding across the dirt before coming to a stop. He coughed violently, vomiting blood as he clutched his abdomen. The room fell into stunned silence. No one dared to move, their eyes locked on Naruto, who stood unshaken, his cold gaze sweeping across the crowd. "You want to talk about destiny?" Naruto said, his voice low and threatening. "Here's the truth. Destiny is nothing but a crutch for the weak. And you've all been leaning on it for far too long. The room froze as glowing seals shimmered across the walls and floor, glowing an ominous red before chains burst forth from various points in the house. The chains lashed out with serpentine precision, wrapping tightly around the necks of the clan head's children. Panic erupted, and shrill cries filled the air as the children gasped for breath, clawing at the chains constricting their throats. "Stop this, Naruto," one of the clan heads bellowed, his voice trembling with fear. Before anyone could act, Shikaku Nara raised a hand, his sharp eyes narrowing as he analyzed the situation. "Don't move," he commanded. "The brat set up secondary traps on the seals. If anyone tries to interfere, he'll kill the children instantly." Naruto chuckled darkly, his calm demeanor chilling in the tense atmosphere. "Clever, lazy man, you're absolutely right." His voice dripped with malice as he added, "The seals are simple, really. If anyone kills them, their necks will snap with such force that their heads will pop off." He exaggerated the "p" in "pop," and the sound seemed to echo ominously, sending shivers down the spines of everyone present. The room was filled with horrified silence. Many of the children, including those who had bullied Naruto relentlessly, were now pale and trembling. Satsuki opened her mouth to speak, desperate to defuse the situation, but when her eyes met Naruto's cold, piercing gaze, she froze, fear coursing through her veins. She looked away, her body shaking as she realized the depth of his rage. Naruto's voice broke the silence. "Hurt me, and they suffer more," he said, his tone deadly. "The seal is designed to amplify their pain tenfold if you so much as touch me." The adults, even the clan heads, were paralyzed, unable to do anything. Suddenly, Jiraiya appeared behind Naruto, a Rasengan in hand, ready to strike the boy down. But before he could land the blow, Naruto substituted with Tsunade, who took the full brunt of the attack. Tsunade slammed into the ground with a sickening thud, coughing up blood. Jiraiya froze in horror at what he had done, his face twisting in disbelief. Naruto turned to him, his expression unreadable. "I'm not surprised," he said coldly. "You wouldn't hesitate to kill me. You're lower than scum." Minato attempted to use his Flying Thunder God technique to subdue Naruto, but his face paled when he realized he couldn't teleport. Naruto turned slightly, smirking over his shoulder. "Oh, did I forget to mention? I temporarily disabled your precious technique. You've become far too dependent on it." Sweat dripped down Minato's face as Naruto's words sank in. Kushina lashed out next, summoning her chakra chains and aiming them at Naruto, but as they neared him, they disintegrated into nothingness. Her breath hitched in shock and horror. "How?" Naruto's smirk widened. "You're supposed to be a Fuinjutsu master, but you can't even comprehend the seals I've placed here and on myself. Face it, Kushina, you're outclassed. You were never ready for someone like me." Jiraiya, recovering from his shock, charged at Naruto again, only to scream in pain as a seal on his back activated, electrocuting him and forcing him to collapse to the ground. Minato, desperate, created a Rasengan and charged at Naruto. "That's enough," he yelled. Naruto caught the Rasengan with his left hand, shocking everyone as he drained its energy into himself. "Enough? No, this is just the beginning." The energy flowed into his right hand as he clenched it into a fist, driving it into Minato's stomach with devastating force. Blood erupted from Minato's mouth as he was sent crashing into the kitchen, landing in a heap. Kushina lunged at Naruto but froze mid-motion, her eyes wide in terror as she looked down. A kunai was embedded in her lower abdomen, blood pooling beneath her. She fell to the ground, writhing in pain. Naomi screamed in rage, a cloak of Kyuubi chakra enveloping her as she charged at Naruto. He smirked, summoning chakra chains that wrapped around his fists like knuckle dusters. "Let's see how strong you really are," he muttered before meeting her head-on. Naruto unleashed a brutal assault, each punch draining the Kyuubi's chakra from Naomi while leaving her battered and bloodied. Her screams of pain filled the room as the chakra cloak faded. "Brother, please, stop," she whimpered through tears, her face swollen and bruised. Naruto straddled her, delivering one final punch to her face. Blood splattered across his own, and he smiled coldly. "Don't call me brother. You lost that right." He stood, breathing heavily, and looked down at Naomi's broken form, her body trembling in a puddle of urine from fear and pain. Everyone in the room was paralyzed with terror. Even the children who had once mocked Naruto stared at him with wide, horrified eyes. Naruto walked over to Kushina, leaning down and twisting the kunai in her abdomen. She cried out in agony, and Makoto Uchiha begged him to stop. Naruto ignored her, whispering something into Kushina's ear. Her eyes widened in shock and horror, tears streaming down her face. Straightening, Naruto addressed the room. It's time you all learned the truth. This village is a cancer, and Minato will be its downfall. He released the full force of his bottled-up bloodlust. The oppressive wave of malice suffocated everyone in the room, leaving them gasping for air and trembling in abject terror. Finally, Naruto withdrew his bloodlust and turned toward the door. I'm leaving, he said calmly. Maybe I'll come back someday. Or maybe not. As he disappeared into the dark night, explosions erupted across the village, shaking the ground. Panicked screams filled the air as flames engulfed several buildings. Chaos consumed Konoha, the destruction a final reminder of the storm that had been brewing within Naruto for years. Time skip. Naruto walked near the border of Takigakure, the chill of the night brushing against his skin as he moved further from Konoha. He had left the village behind in ruins, explosions still echoing faintly in the distance. For the first time in years, he should have felt some semblance of satisfaction, but all he felt was emptiness. A hollow victory. He stopped walking, staring up at the moon hanging in the sky. His hands clenched into fists, his expression dark. The rage that had fueled him was gone, leaving behind only an ache in his chest, a void he didn't know how to fill. Why does it feel like this? He muttered, his voice barely audible. He had shown them all. He had made them suffer, just as they had made him suffer. So why did it feel so meaningless? As he stood there, lost in thought, a faint sound reached his ears. A cry. Naruto's head snapped in the direction of the sound, his senses sharpening. It was a girl's voice, her sobs carrying through the forest. Without a second thought, he took off toward the sound, leaping into the trees. Moving swiftly and silently, Naruto came to a halt on a sturdy branch, his sharp blue eyes scanning the scene below. What he saw made his stomach churn with anger. A young girl about his age was on the ground, crying as 3 Takigakure shinobi surrounded her. Her tanned skin was marred with bruises and dirt, and her mint-green hair was tangled and matted. She looked terrified, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. You thought you could run away from us, demon? One of the men spat, kicking her in the ribs. The girl cried out, curling into herself. I don't want to go back. She screamed, her voice trembling. I don't want to live in a place where I'm treated like a monster. The leader grabbed her hair, yanking her head up roughly. She winced but glared weakly at him through her tears. You don't get a choice, he sneered. You're a Jinchuriki. Your only purpose is to serve this village. You belong to us. Naruto froze, his blood running cold. A Jinchuriki. He watched as the men laughed cruelly. The leader knelt down, pinning the girl's legs to the ground as she struggled. You're not going anywhere, he said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. He reached down and grabbed the hem of her skirt. No, she screamed, thrashing violently. Stop, let me go. The leader ignored her pleas, lifting her skirt and grabbing the waistband of her underwear. His comrades chuckled darkly, one of them unzipping his pants. The girl's cries grew more frantic, her voice breaking as she begged, please. Somebody help me. Naruto's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. His body trembled with barely contained rage as he watched the men prepare to do the unthinkable. Enough, Naruto muttered to himself, his voice low and filled with venom. In an instant, 2 kunai flew through the air, their trajectories silent and precise. Both struck true, embedding themselves in the heads of 2 of the men. They collapsed to the ground, dead before they hit the dirt. The leader froze, his eyes widening in shock as he looked around wildly. What the? A third kunai landed near the girl's trembling hand. She hesitated for only a second before grabbing it, her fear replaced by raw desperation. With a scream, she slashed upward, the blade slicing through the man's groin. He howled in agony, collapsing to the ground. You bitch, he wheezed, clutching his wound. The girl scrambled to her feet, tears streaming down her face. You called me a monster, she said through gritted teeth, her voice shaking. Then I'll show you what a monster can do. She lunged at him, stabbing him in the chest with the kunai. Over and over, she drove the blade into his body, her cries of rage and pain echoing through the forest. Naruto dropped silently from the trees, landing behind her. He watched as she continued stabbing, even though the man had long since stopped moving. Blood soaked her hands and splattered across her tear-streaked face. "Stop," Naruto said quietly, placing a hand on her wrist. The girl froze, her bloodshot eyes meeting his. For a moment, she looked like a wild animal, her body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Then, as if realizing what she had done, she dropped the kunai and collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Naruto knelt down and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried against his chest. "It's over," he said softly. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." She clung to him, her small frame shaking with each sob. Naruto looked down at her, his heart heavy. He had saved her, but he couldn't erase what she had been through. Naruto sat under a tree, his arms crossed, watching the girl he had just saved. She was trembling, her face streaked with dried tears and dirt. He reached into his pack, pulling out a set of clean clothes he had brought with him. Walking over to her, he held them out. "Here, change into these," he said softly. The girl hesitated, looking at him with uncertainty, but after a moment, she nodded. She took the clothes, muttering a quiet, "Thank you," and stepped behind a tree to change. When she returned, the transformation was subtle but noticeable. The clean clothes didn't erase the signs of her trauma, but they gave her a small sense of dignity. Naruto motioned for her to sit, and after a moment of silence, she spoke. "My name is Fu," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Naruto nodded. "Naruto Uzumaki," he replied. Her eyes widened slightly. "Uzumaki?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you related to the fourth Hokage?" Naruto scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Yeah, I'm his son," he admitted, his tone hollow. "Not that it means much." Fu stared at him, stunned. The fourth Hokage's son? Abandoned, neglected and abused by his own village? He nodded, his expression darkening. "Ironic, isn't it? The same people my sperm donor protect treated me like trash. They called me a demon, a monster. They abused me, family neglected me, starved me. All because of a fucking prophecy." Fu's gaze dropped to the ground. "A Jinchuriki," she murmured. Naruto nodded again. "Yeah, and you're one too, aren't you? I heard them call you a demon. Heard them say you were their weapon." She swallowed hard and nodded. Slowly, she turned her back to him, lifting her shirt to reveal her scarred skin. Whip marks, burns, and other signs of torture marred her back, each one a testament to the pain she had endured. "They did this to me," she said, her voice trembling. "Every time I stepped out of line, they reminded me what I was to them. A monster. A tool. Nothing more." Naruto felt a pang of pain in his chest. His Uzumaki sensory abilities allowed him to feel the depth of her anguish, and it nearly overwhelmed him. "I know what that's like," he said quietly. "To be treated like you're less than human. To have everyone look at you with hate and fear." Fu lowered her shirt and turned to face him. "You do?" He nodded. "My village was no different. They blamed me for everything. They beat me, starved me, ignored me. All because I carried the soul Nine Tails." Fu's eyes widened. "The Nine Tails?" Naruto nodded, chuckling bitterly. "Yeah, the strongest of the tailed beasts, sealed inside me by my own father. And for what? So I could protect the village? So I could suffer for their mistakes?" Both of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared pain hanging heavy between them. "Our lives. They're terrible," Fu said softly. Naruto nodded. "Yeah." He hesitated, then admitted, "I thought putting them in their place would make me feel better. Make me feel whole. But all it did was leave me feeling empty." Fu looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "I feel the same way. After killing those men, I thought I'd feel free. But I just feel hollow. Like the pain will never go away." Naruto looked down at his hands, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes, I think, it would be better if it all just ended." Fu nodded slowly. "Me too," she said, her voice trembling. The two of them sat in silence, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger. "Maybe that's the only way," Fu said quietly. Naruto looked at her, his heart heavy. "Maybe," he agreed. Naruto and Fu stood at the edge of the cliff, the cold wind whipping around them, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. Below them, the abyss yawned like a dark, endless maw, promising a release from the pain and despair that clung to their souls. Naruto turned to Fu, his hand tightening around hers. Her green eyes were glassy with tears, her face pale under the faint light of the moon. She looked down at the abyss, her lips trembling. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Naruto gave her a sad, fragile smile. "Me too," he admitted, his voice heavy. "But maybe this is the only way we can be free. Maybe this is where it ends for us." Fu swallowed hard, tears streaming down her cheeks. Do you think there's something after this? Something better?" Naruto closed his eyes, his grip on her hand firm and steady. "I hope so," he said quietly. Maybe in another life, things will be different. Maybe we'll be happy." A moment of silence passed between them as they looked at each other, two broken souls finding solace in shared pain. Fu's voice broke as she spoke, her words trembling like her heart. "You're my first friend, Naruto. If there's another life, I hope we can meet again. Maybe even be a family." Naruto nodded, his own tears spilling over. "I'd like that, Fu. I really would." The two of them closed their eyes, taking a deep breath as they stepped off the edge together. As they fell, time seemed to slow, the wind roaring in their ears. Fu's voice broke into a trembling hum, and soon, both of them began to sing softly, their voices carrying the pain and hope of their short lives. "I've held on for as long as I can. For the ones that I had to defend. I've been strong every day of my life. If she wants, death could take me this time." The abyss grew closer, the darkness rising to meet them like a wave. "This world is a wasteland where nothing can grow. I used to have strength, but I ran out of hope. I know it's my fault that I'm here all alone. This world is a wasteland. Please let me go, 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 go." Naruto looked at Fu through the rush of wind, her green hair whipping wildly around her face, her tears glistening like shattered stars. He squeezed her hand one last time, their fingers intertwined as they fell toward what they believed was the end. "If I could just lay my head down and rest. If there was nothing to fight or protect. Maybe then I could finally be free. Maybe death is like falling asleep." The world spun around them, the dark void rushing closer with every heartbeat. Their voices grew stronger, defiant, and filled with all the emotions they had kept buried for so long. "This world is a wasteland where nothing can grow. I used to have strength, but I ran out of hope. I know it's my fault that I'm here all alone. This world is a wasteland. I'm not ready to face it. Don't go saying goodbye. There's a beauty in changes. And I want to try." As the final line of the song echoed between them, a blinding light erupted from the abyss below, engulfing them in its radiance. The air crackled with raw energy, and they were consumed by a force far greater than anything they had ever known. Naruto's eyes flew open as his body was jolted by a surge of power. He reached for Fu, but the light surrounded them both, pulling them into its chaotic embrace. They landed on the ground with a heavy thud, coughing and gasping for air. The pain in their bodies was sharp and unfamiliar, and the world around them was unlike anything they had ever seen. Fu scrambled to her feet, panic in her voice. "Naruto, what happened? Where are we?" Before he could answer, a voice boomed around them, powerful yet calm, resonating with an undeniable authority. "Welcome, Naruto Uzumaki and Fu," it said. Both children turned toward the source of the voice, their eyes widening in awe and fear. Standing before them was a tall, imposing man with raven black hair and regal features. His presence was overwhelming, his very existence radiating a sense of divinity. Naruto swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he asked, Who are you?" "Doesn't have his golden armor in this time." The man smiled faintly. "I am someone who knows your pain. And I am here to offer you a choice." The grand hallways of the Imperial Palace echoed faintly with the sound of armored boots and soft conversations. Akane's fox ears twitched as she walked, her crimson hair swaying lightly behind her. Her golden eyes scanned the passing space marines, each one saluting with a fist to their chest, a mark of respect toward the wives of the Emperor's adopted son and daughter. Beside her, Fu strode confidently, her augmented frame giving her an air of silent strength. "It's hard to believe it's been 100 years since we stepped out of that cursed webway pocket dimension," Akane murmured, her tone heavy with reflection. Fu nodded, her bright green hair catching the artificial light. 100 years, yet it feels like yesterday we were trapped for what felt like eternity. 10 millennia. It's a wonder we didn't lose our sanity. Or worse, Yoruichi added, her deep, silky voice cutting through the air. The dark-skinned warrior's golden eyes flicked toward Rangaku, whose expression had darkened. We could have been corrupted, but somehow, we came out intact. That's something to be grateful for. Rangaku's pace slowed as a wave of sorrow passed over her features. Her blue-gray eyes misted with unshed tears as memories resurfaced. Yoruichi noticed immediately, her demeanor softening. She placed a reassuring hand on Rangaku's shoulder, squeezing gently. "You okay?" Yoruichi asked, her voice quieter now, laced with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Rangaku replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "It's just, when we returned, everything had changed. And finding out about him, about Satoshi." Her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath to steady herself. Akane sighed, her ears flattening momentarily as she turned to Rangaku. "Your grief is still fresh, even after all this time. I can't imagine how it felt, learning what Mortarion did to your son." Rangaku nodded solemnly. "My firstborn, my baby boy, taken from me by that rotting monster, Mortarion. He didn't just kill Satoshi, he plagued him with one of Nurgle's diseases. My son suffered until his lover, Sabora Dower, put him out of his misery." Yoruichi's hand on Rangaku's shoulder tightened. Sabora must have loved him deeply to make that decision. It wasn't easy for her either, I'm sure. "She did," Rangaku said with a bittersweet smile. "And she gave me something precious after he was gone. My granddaughter, Arisa. She's the last piece of Satoshi I have. At least Sabora is with the Uzumaki clan, protecting her, Uzu Prime, where the chaos cannot reach her, thanks to the Psyker Fu Injutsu users there." "That's something to hold on to," Fu said softly. "Arisa is a gift, Rangaku. Don't forget that." "I won't," Rangaku replied, wiping a stray tear. She straightened her posture, letting out a slow exhale. "I'm fine now. Let's keep moving." "Good," Akane said, flicking her ears forward. "Because we need to track down our favorite blueberry brother-in-law, Ribute. You know how he gets if we're late." The mention of Gilliman brought a faint smile to the group, lightening the heavy atmosphere. As they continued down the corridor, their steps grew more purposeful. Akane glanced back, her fox-like grin returning. "Think he's going to lecture us again?" "Always," Yoruichi said with a smirk. "But he means well." The four women walked side by side, their bond as unshakable as the foundation of the Imperial Palace itself, heading toward their next destination. Gilliman office. In Gilliman's office, sheaves of blueprints were scattered across the desk like the aftermath of a whirlwind. He spotted something of interest written on one of the sheets and reached for it, gritting his teeth as the purring mechanics of his suit reminded him of its omnipresent constraints. Instinctively, he reached with his right hand. The integration points for the Hand of Dominion on his left made fine tasks nearly impossible, even with the over-gauntlet and its underslung bolter removed. Day-to-day tasks like this were a struggle, a constant reminder of how his armor, magnificent as it was, limited him in ways he never thought possible. His armored fingers pushed at the slick plastic. The ceramite skidded across the desk, sending the papers fluttering to the floor in an ungraceful mess. "Oh, for the love of," Gilliman grumbled, leaning forward to pick them up. Awkwardly, he bent down, the bulky joints of the armor of fate straining at his waist. The suit, designed for battle rather than bureaucracy, made even the simplest of movements cumbersome. He had to kneel, lowering himself as his fingers reached for the scattered flimsies. The first few attempts were futile. His fingertips slid across the sheets, sending them skittering further across the polished floor in a mocking dance. He growled in frustration, abandoning his attempt. Rising to his full height, he exhaled sharply, his patience thin but his sense of humor somehow intact. A curious glance toward the room's entrance revealed his sister-in-law, Fu, along with Rangaku and Akane, who stood watching him. He could tell they were trying not to laugh, but their poorly concealed smirks betrayed them. Deciding to give them a show, he sighed theatrically. "I have the manual dexterity of a Legio Cybernetica battle automaton," Gilliman announced, his voice filled with exaggerated exasperation. "Created by the Lord of all mankind, master of the greatest armies in the Imperium, and I cannot pick up a plastic flimsy." He gestured at the offending papers with a glare. "My greatest enemy." There was a moment of thoughtful silence. Then Fu snorted, and Rangaku burst into laughter, soon joined by Akane. Rangaku, in particular, could barely contain herself, doubling over as tears streamed from her eyes. Her laughter turned into snorting, which only made her laugh harder. Gilliman raised a brow at the spectacle, amused despite himself. He had to turn fully around to watch them, his ornamental wings and the large halo mounted on his back making it impossible to see over his shoulder. At least he had stopped knocking into furniture, there was that. The laughter continued, and for a moment, the oppressive weight of the grim, dark future seemed to lift. Even Sicarius, standing rigid in the corner, looked like he was struggling to keep a straight face. "You are joking, my lord?" Sicarius ventured cautiously, the tone of disbelief almost comical. Gilliman gave him a wry look. "By the throne, why am I expected to be serious at all times?" "Yes, Captain Sicarius, I am making light of my predicament. During the worst of the Great Crusade, I was known to make the occasional jest. Even after Terra fell, I dared to find moments of levity. I did not spend my previous life writing deep thoughts into little notebooks, though I did plenty of that as well, but sometimes I dared to enjoy myself. I suppose that part of me was omitted from the hagiographies." Sicarius nodded slowly, still processing this unexpected revelation. "Humor is not something you are renowned for, my lord," he said hesitantly. Before Gilliman could respond, Rengoku chimed in, a playful grin on her face. "Don't be such a stick in the mud, Sicarius. Jokes and laughter are the best medicine, even in a grim, dark future where everything is, well, let's face it, utterly screwed." Akane sighed, muttering under her breath, "Great. Now it's even more depressing." But Rengoku's infectious energy refused to be dampened. She nudged Akane with a smirk. "That's why we laugh, Akane. Because if we didn't, we'd all go mad." Gilliman allowed a small smile to grace his lips as he watched the scene unfold. For all the burdens of leadership and the crushing weight of responsibility, moments like these reminded him of what they were all fighting for. After helping their brother-in-law tackle his greatest enemy, paperwork, Fu and Akane leaned back, visibly satisfied with their contribution. Gilliman, relieved to see his desk no longer drowning in blueprints and reports, folded his arms and asked, "Now that I owe you one, what can I do for you?" Akane exchanged a glance with Fu, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Akane spoke first. "There's something we've been meaning to discuss. About our time in the Webway pocket dimension." Gilliman's expression shifted immediately, his interest piqued. He straightened, his piercing gaze locking onto her. "I've had questions about that place since you mentioned it before. And you say Naruto found something there?" Akane nodded. "Yes, but there's more to it. While we were trapped in that dimension, we encountered two chaos gods, Tzeentch and Slaanesh." Gilliman froze. His usually stoic demeanor faltered for a moment, the mention of Slaanesh causing his jaw to tighten. Memories of Fulgrim's fall rushed to the surface. He could still see his brother's twisted smile, hear the mocking words that dripped with betrayal. Slaanesh had taken Fulgrim, body, soul, and purpose, and shattered him into a grotesque parody of what he once was. But then, as his thoughts spiraled toward bitterness, Gilliman's mind drifted to Fulgrith. She hadn't been found in the Webway. Naruto had discovered her after their escape, alone and wandering through the ruins of a desolate world. At first, Gilliman had doubted her intentions. A clone of Fulgrim, here, of all places? It seemed too convenient, too contrived. And yet, she was different. Where Fulgrim had exuded pride and arrogance, Fulgrith carried herself with a weight of shame and guilt. Her violet eyes, so much like Fulgrim's, betrayed a fear Gilliman had never seen in his brother. She had been hesitant, unsure of her place. More emotional, more expressive, more human. Gilliman hadn't trusted her at first, but Naruto's intervention had been transformative. Somehow, Naruto's presence, his relentless optimism, had made her feel safe. Gilliman had seen it in the way she smiled, a hesitant, fragile thing, but genuine. Fulgrith may have been a clone of Fulgrim, but in many ways, she was an improvement. She wasn't bound to the same arrogance, the same hubris that had led his brother into Slaanesh's embrace. He exhaled softly, bringing himself back to the present. "Tzeentch and Slaanesh," he repeated, his tone measured. "The fact that you encountered them and escaped speaks volumes. Few can claim such a feat." Akane nodded. "It wasn't easy. But there's more. Naruto found a device in the Webway, given to him by someone who managed to enter and leave with ease." Gilliman raised an eyebrow, curious. "Who?" Fu spoke this time. "Naruto said it was a drunken scientist with a terrible personality. The man claimed he was helping because he owed a favor to someone who looked like Naruto. Gilliman's brow furrowed in disbelief. A drunken scientist, wandering the webway? That seems improbable. That's what Naruto thought too, Fu said with a shrug. But the man activated the device, said, "Away we go," and disappeared. Gilliman rubbed his chin thoughtfully. A mere human, entering and leaving the webway unscathed. It defies logic. And the connection to Naruto only deepens the mystery. Akane smirked. You'll drive yourself mad trying to figure it out. Sometimes, it's best to just accept the impossible when Naruto's involved. Gilliman chuckled faintly. A fair point. Still, I'll investigate. If this man is as capable as you say, he may be a valuable ally, or a significant threat. The conversation shifted, but Gilliman's thoughts lingered on Fulgrith and Slanesh. He couldn't shake the feeling that, despite her differences, her origins were tied to the god of excess in some way. Yet, as he recalled her tentative smile and Naruto's unwavering faith in her, he allowed himself a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Fulgrith was proof that even the most corrupted legacies could be redeemed. Somewhere in the vast expanse of Imperium space, a cluster of thriving planets stood as a testament to survival, growth, and the unbreakable will of the Uzumaki clan. The heart of this civilization was Uzu Prime, a world where ancient traditions met the technological advancements of the Golden Age, a home for a people who had endured the destruction of their past and emerged stronger. The Uzumaki's exodus to a new universe long before the Age of Strife, when humanity was at the peak of its golden age of technology, Naruto approached his adopted father, the Emperor of Mankind, with a plea. The Uzumaki clan, once a powerful force in the elemental nations, had been nearly wiped out, their survivors forced into hiding after the Second Shinobi War. Naruto asked the Emperor to help locate and rescue the remaining members of his clan, bringing them into a new universe where they could be safe from further persecution. The Emperor was initially uncertain, but it was Fu, Naruto's wife, who convinced him. She spoke of the Uzumaki clan's unparalleled skill in sealing arts, a power that could be useful to the Emperor's grand vision. Seeing potential in their abilities and out of respect for his son's request, the Emperor agreed. The search began, and soon enough, the surviving Uzumaki were found and transported to Terra. The Uzumaki's integration into Terra life on Terra was overwhelming at first, but Naruto and his wives, having already lived on Terra for millennia after arriving in the 8th millennium BC, guided their clan through the transition. Over time, the Uzumaki adapted, mingling with the people of Terra, and even intermarrying. This intermingling of bloodlines led to the birth of a new generation of Uzumaki, children with a rare and unique genetic inheritance. Unknown to the clan, only the Emperor was aware that the Uzumaki bloodline carried a latent, powerful gift, one that had yet to be awakened. The Emperor observed their growth, intrigued by their resilience and the potential their lineage possessed. The rise of the Uzumaki kingdom centuries passed, and the Uzumaki clan flourished on Terra. Their natural longevity, able to live up to 150 years, allowed them to establish themselves as a significant force among humanity. Eventually, they declared Naruto and Fu their king and queen, recognizing their leadership and wisdom. It was also during this time that the clan learned a shocking truth: Kurama, the Kyuubi, was one of Naruto's wives. Instead of fearing her, the Uzumaki welcomed her, seeing her not as a beast, but as family. For the first time in her long existence, Kurama felt true acceptance, though she refused to show her softer side. Then came the golden age of technology, an era of incredible scientific and technological advancements. Humanity spread across the stars, colonizing planets. Artificial intelligence, warp drives, navigators, and STCs became widespread. Psykers began to emerge among the human population. During this time, Naruto led his clan to colonize a planet of their own, allowing them to expand further. This period marked the greatest era of prosperity for the Uzumaki clan. The Age of Strife, when everything fell apart but paradise was not eternal. The Age of Strife, a time of war, chaos, and destruction, began. Warp storms cut off human colonies from Terra and other worlds. New human subspecies, such as ratlings, ogrins, and squats, evolved. Many human worlds regressed to barbarism. Orcs and other hostile xenos began attacking vulnerable colonies. Psykers became more common, leading to widespread demonic possession. Cybernetic revolts, mutations, and the rise of chaos cults further destabilized humanity. The birth of Slaanesh threw the balance of chaos into further madness. As warp storms spread, the Uzumaki took extreme measures to protect their homeworld. Combining their sealing arts with psyker abilities, they devised a massive planetary barrier, shielding them from the horrors of the warp. Their planet was cut off from the rest of humanity, isolated in the darkness. Despite their seclusion, the Uzumaki thrived. Their genetic resilience, technological prowess, and sealing techniques allowed them to survive when countless others perished. They had access to STCs, which enabled them to maintain their infrastructure, produce food, and even expand. In time, they colonized 3 additional planets, but Uzu Prime remained their heart. The return of their king thousands of years passed. When Naruto finally found his way back to his people, he was stunned. His once nearly extinct clan had grown into a powerful civilization, their population in the billions across multiple planets. But he was not alone. He returned with 3 more wives and a large family of 26 children. The Uzumaki also learned that Naruto had revived Mito Uzumaki. Upon learning what had become of their clan, their betrayal at the hands of Konoha, and the failures of Tsunade and Kushina, Mito was disappointed. The two had abandoned the Uzumaki way. They had forgotten the clan's most sacred creed: family over pride. Family over glory. Family over all. She grieved for what was lost but vowed to ensure that the Uzumaki would never forget their roots again. The Horus Heresy and the fall of the Imperium. Then came the Horus Heresy, the greatest betrayal in the history of mankind. The Emperor was lost, entombed within the Golden Throne, and the Imperium fell into 10,000 years of darkness and decay. During this time, Naruto was sealed away, alongside his wives, for reasons lost to history. Mito, however, lived on, her lifespan unnaturally extended, allowing her to witness the fall of the Imperium firsthand. Millennia later, when the Imperium rediscovered the Uzumaki worlds, they saw them as a threat. Their technology, which had origins from the Dark Age of technology, was deemed heretical, and Imperial forces sought to destroy them. However, before a full-scale war could erupt, Naruto and Akane's third daughter overruled the Imperium's actions. She reminded them of the debt they owed Naruto and the Emperor's original protection of their clan. The Uzumaki and the Imperium today. Now, the Uzumaki stand as a unique force within the Imperium, not fully integrated, yet not enemies. They swore loyalty to Naruto, his offspring, and the Emperor and his sons, Gilliman. With Naruto's return, they solidified their place in the Imperium, becoming an independent but unshakably loyal faction. The Emperor, recognizing Naruto as his adopted son, had long ago granted him a fragment of his essence, subtly augmenting him into a man-made Primarch. And Fu as well, giving both his blood to them. They became Psykers because of their chakra allo origin related in Naruto not only chakra but also by blood. But thanks this genetic enhancement allowed the Uzumaki to develop their own Astartes, including female space marines, something unheard of within the Imperium. Now, with the Imperium in turmoil, the Uzumaki clan remains a beacon of stability and strength, their people numerous, their worlds fortified, and their future secure. So long as they never forget their creed. And as the Great Rift threatens reality itself, the Uzumaki prepare for the next war to come. The interior of the Nexus Laboratory, one of the most advanced research centers in Uzumaki Prime, was a stark contrast to the elegant, disciplined halls of the Cage Citadel. While most scientific facilities in the Imperium were either sterile and cold or rusted with centuries of neglect, Puka's personal lab was a chaotic mix of cutting-edge technology and sheer nerdy clutter. Holographic screens flickered with cascading streams of data in multiple dimensions, some written in standard Terran Gothic, others in ancient Uzumaki script, and a few encoded in esoteric quantum sealing runes that only she could decipher. The walls were lined with shelves stuffed with rare artifacts, glowing databanks, and even vintage 21st century memorabilia. A bizarre mix of shinobi scrolls and posters of bands long forgotten by the current age. And in the middle of it all, furiously typing on an Omni slate, was Puka Uzumaki, the brilliant, eccentric, and undeniably voluptuous genius of the Uzumaki clan. Puka was, in every way, the spitting image of her father, but with some clear distinctions. Her golden blonde hair, tied into twin tails, bounced with every movement, contrasting against her sun-kissed skin inherited from her Kyuubi mother, Akane. Her deep blue eyes, brimming with mischief and unrelenting intelligence, flickered between her monitors as she crunched on a piece of toast like a chipmunk, occasionally puffing her cheeks as she chewed. She was plump but undeniably attractive, a full-figured beauty whose curves were a perfect fusion of power and femininity. Her chest, an impressive 107, bounced slightly with every exaggerated motion as she waved her arms wildly in frustration. Despite being a 21st-century pop culture geek in a futuristic world, she was easily one of the smartest beings in the known universe, her IQ dwarfing even the legendary Nara clan's greatest minds. TCH. How does this make sense? She whined, slamming a hammer fist onto the reinforced desk. The impact sent a shockwave through the lab, rattling equipment but failing to damage the highly reinforced materials. She'd done this enough times that the furniture was specifically designed to survive her tantrums. On her screens, a dimensional signature pulsed, sending streams of energy readings unlike anything recorded within the warp. It was clean, untainted by chaos, and bore a signature that tickled at something deep in her subconscious. A connection to the man who had once helped her father and mother escape the webway pocket dimension. She took another chomp of her toast, muttering between bites. So you're telling me, some half-drunk, dimension-hopping scientist just waltzed into our universe? She pointed accusingly at her screen. With no consequences? No warp corruption? She flailed her arms, her bust bouncing wildly, as she ranted. Are you kidding me? We spend literal centuries fortifying ourselves against the warp, and this guy just, casually steps in like it's an open-door policy. Puka growled, puffing her cheeks. Her frustration only grew as she waved her arms in exaggerated exasperation, her bust bouncing slightly with the movement. How can someone just walk into our universe without consequence? No warp exposure, no reality distortion, no backlash from the great ocean, nothing. Her blue eyes burned with curiosity and irritation in equal measure. If there was one thing she hated, it was an unanswered question. And this anomaly was the biggest one she had encountered in years. Standing nearby, two Uzumaki sentinels stood motionless, their towering forms clad in ornate crimson and gold armor, reminiscent of the Adeptus Custodes but uniquely Uzumaki in design. Unlike their imperial counterparts, they were not giants, rather, they were the pinnacle of chakra-infused warriors, enhanced to superhuman levels without relying on crude gene forging. Each one was a master of combat, their armor lined with seals and mechanisms that made them resistant to both psychic attacks and technological corruption. One of them, Sentinel UZ-47, turned slightly to face her. Lady Puka, should we prepare for possible incursion? Puka paused mid-bite, then waved her hand dismissively. No need yet. If it turns into a problem, Dad will punch it. She paused, then smirked. Or Mom will eat it. The sentinel remained silent for a moment before nodding. Understood, Lady Puka. Puka groaned and leaned back in her chair, staring at the fluctuating dimensional readings. This doesn't make sense, she muttered. If this isn't warp-based, then what in the hell is it? A lost technology? A mistake in reality? A remnant of the old one's work? Her lips curled into a grin. Despite her frustration, excitement bubbled within her. There was nothing more thrilling than solving a mystery that no one else could. All right then, she murmured, cracking her knuckles. Let's see what you're hiding. With renewed determination, Puka dived back into the data, unaware that the anomaly wasn't just an abstract phenomenon waiting to be solved. It was coming, and she was about to meet it face to face. The doors to the Nexus laboratory hissed open with a soft hydraulic release, and the heavy air of technology and ozone was interrupted by the presence of a lone figure stepping inside. A man, tall and composed, walked into the lab with measured steps. His dark brown robes swayed slightly, the fabric worn but well kept. A sword rested on his back, its hilt wrapped in old leather, and in his right hand, he carried a staff, an intricate piece of craftsmanship adorned with arcane sigils and a faintly glowing core. His sharp brown eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar sight of machines, scattered documents, and the ever-determined woman at the center of it all. Ash, one of the few surviving psychers from the Spirit of Eternity, the ill-fated ship that had been swallowed by a warp storm 5,000 years ago, only to be flung into the future. He and his comrades had nearly been condemned to death or worse at the hands of the Imperium, deemed anomalies, possible heretics, or worse, mutants tainted by the warp. Their fate had seemed sealed, another casualty of the Imperium's paranoia. Until she saved them. Puka Uzumaki, granddaughter of the Emperor, had stepped in. Her lineage alone granted her authority beyond measure, but it was her words, her fire, and her undeniable will that had given them a second chance. She had taken them in, brought them to Uzu Prime, and revealed to them the twisted, brutal history of the galaxy they now found themselves in. Ash, a man who had already lived longer than he should have, learned just how deeply the galaxy had spiraled into madness. At first, he and Puka had clashed, two powerful personalities, both stubborn, both fiercely independent. He had thought her brash, reckless, too playful for the gravity of their reality. She had thought him too brooding, too serious, always carrying the weight of the past. But somewhere along the way, something changed. A spark ignited between them, something neither could fully explain. Now, standing in the lab, he offered a small smirk. "Still overworking yourself, I see." Puka turned in her chair at the sound of his voice, her face lighting up with a smile. Well, look who it is, my favorite space wizard," she teased, though the frustration in her eyes was still evident. With an exaggerated sigh, she slumped down in her chair, causing a natural bounce that Ash pointedly ignored, or at least tried to. Her golden twin tails framed her face as she pouted. "This dimensional anomaly is giving me a headache. It makes zero sense, Ash. None. No warp signature, no psychic trail, nothing. It's just there, defying every damn law of reality." She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Ash watched her for a moment, then stepped closer. Without a word, he placed his hands on her shoulders, applying firm yet careful pressure. Puka flinched slightly at first, but as his fingers worked their way into her muscles, a pleased sigh escaped her lips. "Oh, yeah. That's the stuff," she murmured, melting into his touch. "Damn it, I love your magic hands." Ash chuckled. "It's not magic, just technique." "Same difference," she mumbled, eyes closed in bliss. A mischievous glint appeared in her blue eyes as an idea crossed her mind. She slowly opened them, tilting her head to look at the two Uzumaki sentinels standing guard. "You too," she said, her voice carrying that unmistakable tone of authority. "I need to speak with Ash alone." The sentinels exchanged a glance before nodding. "Understood, Lady Puka." Without question, they turned and exited the lab, their crimson and gold armor gleaming under the artificial light. As the doors sealed behind them, Puka reached for a control panel and tapped a command. The lab's reinforced windows darkened, shifting to reflective mirror mode, completely blocking any view from the outside. Ash raised an eyebrow. "Why did you?" He turned his head toward her, and his words died in his throat. Puka stood before him, completely bare, her skin glistening from hours spent in the lab. Her golden locks framed her face as she gave him a slow, knowing smile. "I've been in here for hours," she purred. "I'm all sweaty." Ash swallowed hard. His mind, usually so sharp and disciplined, completely blanked as his eyes involuntarily traced the curves of her body. Her confident stride carried her toward the bathroom door, her hips swaying in a way that was utterly hypnotic. She paused at the entrance, looking over her shoulder at him with a smirk. "Care to help me shower?" Ash, for all his centuries of experience, could only stare for a moment before slowly exhaling. Then, very quietly, he murmured a small prayer. If there were any gods out there, real or imagined, he silently thanked them. As he stepped toward her, the bathroom door slid shut behind them. From within, the sound of Puka's giggle echoed through the lab. Another universe. In another universe, inside a cluttered garage filled with random scientific junk, a swirling green portal opened with a loud VWORP. Two equine figures shot out, tumbling onto the floor before the portal snapped shut behind them. The two ponies groaned as they lay on the cold concrete. One was a gray-coated, spiky-haired stallion with a drooling mouth and an unamused expression. The other was a smaller, brown-coated, nervously sweating colt. Across the room, two motionless human bodies slumped in chairs, one belonging to Rick Sanchez, the other to Morty Smith. They looked disturbingly corpse-like, their faces slack and eyes blank. The gray stallion, Pony Rick, sighed and muttered, "Burp, well, that was almost AF at #Kayan disaster." Note to self. Never underestimate an enraged yellow Pegasus. Morty, still panting from their escape, turned to Rick, his wide pony eyes filled with panic. Jesus, Rick, what the hell did you do to Fluttershy? She looked like she wanted to skin us alive. Pony Rick rolled his eyes as he trotted over to the motionless human bodies. He clicked a small device attached to his equine chest, and instantly, his consciousness transferred back to his human body. His pony form slumped over like a lifeless puppet. Human Rick blinked, stretched his fingers, and cracked his neck. Yawn, relax, Morty. I just stole her piss, Rick said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Morty, still trapped in his pony body, twitched violently. You what? Rick sighed as he adjusted his lab coat. Her pee, Morty. You know, urine. That yellow liquid waste? Turns out, Fluttershy's body naturally produces a unique organic compound that's highly valuable for, let's just say, science. Morty facehuffed. Oh my god, Rick, you may have stole those two shit, but you can't just steal Fluttershy's pee. Rick shrugged. Oh, get off your high horse, Morty. Literally. Morty groaned. Okay, but, why the hell would you even want her pee? Rick smirked and held up a vial filled with glowing golden liquid. That, my dear Morty, is classified information. Burp, but let's just say, it's a key ingredient for some of my latest experiments. Morty's pony eyes narrowed. Let me guess. Drugs? Rick paused, then gave him a half smirk. Maybe, maybe not. I dunno yet. Before Morty could scream in frustration, they both heard a voice call out from the entrance of the garage. Grandpa Rick. They turned to see a young boy with spiky blonde hair, blue eyes, and 3 whisker marks on each cheek standing at the door. He looked about 14, wearing an orange hoodie and black pants, his arms crossed in suspicion. Beside him stood a girl who was practically his twin, except she had longer hair tied into twin tails, and she looked more confident and mischievous. Naruto and Naruko Uzumaki, Rick's adopted grandchildren. How that happened? Well, that was a long and complicated story the narrator wasn't going to explain right now. Naruko's sharp blue eyes scanned the room, immediately landing on Morty's still pony body, then the limp pony Rick lying on the floor. Her eyebrow twitched. Okay, what the hell am I looking at? She asked flatly. Naruto glanced between Rick, Morty, and the weird pony forms, before deadpanning, yeah. This is looking pretty sus. Morty, still in pony form, sighed. Okay, listen, long story short, we went to the My Little Pony universe. Naruko's eye twitched. You did what now? Naruto raised a hand. Actually, real question. Why the hell is Morty a pony? Morty hesitated. Rick butted in with a grin. Oh, that's easy. He got turned into one when we escaped because he screamed like a little bee. %H when Fluttershy tried to kill me. Naruko raised an eyebrow. What did you do? Morty groaned. He stole Fluttershy's piss. There was silence. Naruto blinked. Naruko's face scrunched up. Both siblings looked at each other in unspoken horror before simultaneously turning back to Rick. What the F at #K, old man? Rick rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. That's the part that freaks you out? Not the interdimensional travel, not the pony transformations, not the fact that we nearly got murdered by pastel-colored equines, but the pee thing? Naruto shook his head, looking deeply disturbed. Man, even for you, that's F at #Ked up. Naruko, meanwhile, looked like she was trying not to puke. I don't even want to ask, but I have to. What else did you steal? Morty hesitated again, looking away awkwardly. Naruko narrowed her eyes. Morty, what else did he steal? Morty gulped. Princess Celestia and Princess Luna's. Shit. More silence. Naruto looked like his brain had just blue-screened. Naruko's eye twitched violently. She slowly turned to Rick with a look of pure disgust. You stole horse poop? Rick, completely unfazed, simply nodded. Technically, alicorn poop. Very different. It contains rare biological elements that. Naruko cut him off. I am going to F at #King Vomit. Naruto raised a hand. Hold up. Just, hold up. Are you seriously telling me that you went to a world full of colorful magic ponies, and the best thing you could come up with was stealing their piss and shish? Rick shrugged. Look, kid, I go where the science takes me. Naruto threw his hands up in exasperation. You could have just gotten a magic artifact or something. But no, you had to go for pony waste products. As the argument escalated into full-blown yelling, Naruto groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. F at #K me. I still have to help out that other me from UA High today. Morty, still pony-shaped, tilted his head. Wait, another you? Naruto sighed. Yeah, long story. Some multiversal crap. We've got other versions of ourselves all over the place. Rick smirked and took a sip from his flask. And it's only gonna get weirder. Morty groaned. I hate my life. Naruto just deadpanned. I hate his life, too. Meanwhile, the corpse-like pony versions of Rick and Morty just lay on the floor, staring into the abyss. Back to 40K universe. He had trained her, protected her, raised her to be strong. But he had not been strong enough to save her. He had watched as the darkness took her, as her light faded, as her voice, once filled with warmth, became something twisted. And then, on that battlefield, as she lay dying, the corruption barely holding her body together. She had reached for him. Not as a warrior, not as a servant of chaos, but as his little girl. And he had been too late. I failed you. His whisper was lost to the wind. For all his power, for all his victories, for all the blood he had spilled in the name of his family, of the Imperium, of the Emperor. This was a battle he had lost. And no amount of time would ever change that. Imperial Palace Lab. Varro inclined his head slightly, his expression softening. I appreciate your words, Lady Fu. Fu shook her head with a gentle smile, waving her hand dismissively. Stop with the formality, Varro. Just call me Fu, it makes me feel old. Varro, ever the pragmatic, merely stated, you're the oldest living being on Terra, along with your husband and children. Fu chuckled at that, knowing he was simply stating facts. She had existed long before most civilizations in the Imperium had even formed. Yet, despite the centuries, she never truly felt old. Time for her was something else entirely. Deciding to shift the conversation, she leaned slightly against the table, her golden eyes gleaming with thought. I've been thinking about the warp, she said, her tone shifting to one of contemplation. Ever since our return, I've been trying to find a way to seal the Chaos Gods. To create a device using a combination of Fuinjutsu, Psyker power, and a bit of alien technology. Varro nodded, clearly intrigued but skeptical. I've reviewed your theories. It would be difficult, if not impossible. Fu tilted her head slightly, prompting him to continue. He elaborated, the warp is ever-changing. It does not adhere to static laws of reality. To seal something that constantly shifts, alters space, and bends time itself, it would require immense resources, an army of psychers, and a deep understanding of both sealing arts and the nature of the Imperium. Fu nodded in agreement. That's true, but, she gestured with her hands, her mind working through an idea. Why not create a seal that doesn't just close off the warp, but redirects it somewhere else? Varro raised an eyebrow at that, interest flickering across his usually reserved expression. Explain. Fu smirked. Imagine creating a pocket universe, not just a simple containment field, but something more intricate. Instead of sealing the warp away into an inescapable void, we create something that acts as both a prison and a self-sustaining loop. The warp would be drawn into it, shifting as it naturally does, but the very act of its movement would fuel the structure of its own containment. A paradoxical storage system, an infinite box where the warp leaks into itself rather than back into reality. Varro rubbed his chin, considering the concept. It was bold, unlike anything ever attempted before. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized, it wasn't entirely impossible. This is highly intriguing, he admitted. It would require incredibly precise manipulation of dimensional physics. A seal that breathes with the warp rather than opposes it. It's dangerous, but also, possibly, the only viable method to truly contain chaos rather than merely hold it at bay. Fu smiled knowingly. Now you're getting it. Uzu Prime, orbit. A lone ship emerged from the warp above Uzu Prime, its sleek black hull cutting through the void like a predator in the dark. Its design bore a striking resemblance to the Sith infiltrator from 21st century pop culture, an homage to a time long past. Inside the ship, standing near the pit, was a man with fiery red hair, tanned skin, and piercing orange eyes. Kazuki Uzumaki, the fourth child of Naruto and Fu, stared at the holographic display as he guided the ship into orbit. Kazuki had been born in the 21st century alongside his half-sister Puka, and like her, he had been a total pop culture nerd. His love for Star Wars was unmatched, though the passage of time had turned his admiration bittersweet. Centuries had passed, and the legacy of George Lucas had been buried under the sands of history, lost to the grimdark future where the Imperium of man held dominion. Disney had long since turned to dust, but its sins remained, a fact that irritated him every time he thought about it. He opened a communication channel with the observation tower and spaceport, transmitting his personal clearance codes. A security officer's voice crackled over the comms. "Clearance accepted. Welcome back, Prince Kazuki." Kazuki sighed internally. He never liked being called Prince. It was an unnecessary formality that came with being the son of Naruto and Fu, but he had long since given up trying to correct people. The ship smoothly descended through the planet's atmosphere, heading toward the Citadel where he would finally get some time away from the relentless war against chaos. His clothing reflected his unique mix of interests. He wore a long, high-collared warlock robe inspired by his favorite video game from the old world, combined with the rugged utility of an adventurer like Indiana Jones. His gear bore fresh scratches and burn marks, souvenirs from an encounter with Chaos Space Marines just a few days ago. More importantly, he had just come from a meeting with his spies stationed within Slaaneish's realm, carrying intel that would be crucial for his uncle Guilliman. But that could wait. Right now, he just wanted a moment to relax. The ship touched down at the designated landing pad, the boarding ramp hissing as it lowered. Stepping out, Kazuki stretched his arms and took a deep breath. The city skyline of Uzu Prime greeted him, not the cold, oppressive architecture of the Imperium, but something more alive, more home. It wasn't covered in the gothic grimdark nonsense that filled his everyday life. A squad of sentinels approached him. One of the guards saluted. "Prince Kazuki, welcome back." Kazuki waved off the formality. Yeah, casual, please." He rubbed the back of his neck. "So, any of my siblings on planet right now?" The guard nodded. "Your sister Puka has been here for the last 5 months. She's been in the labs, still trying to uncover the identity of the man who saved your parents." Kazuki sighed, muttering under his breath. "She's been locked up in that lab for months? God, she must have missed a lot of showers." He shook his head and thanked the guard before disappearing in a blur, body flickering straight to the Citadel. It was time to see his older sister. Terra, Imperial Palace Gardens. Akane stood in the lush palace garden, her fox ears twitching slightly, and her tail waving slowly behind her. The scent of flowers, rare in the grim darkness of the far future, filled the air, yet she barely registered it. Her golden eyes were locked onto the vast architecture of the Imperial Palace. A place once unshakable, once the symbol of the Emperor's absolute rule. Her mind drifted back to the siege of Terra. The echoes of bolter fire, the clash of blades, the horrific roars of chaos warlords and demons still haunted her even after millennia. She could still see the burning sky, the corpses of the once mighty legions, and the betrayal that had nearly shattered everything. She closed her eyes, pushing those memories back. When she opened them, she looked down at the old, slightly faded picture in her hands. It was fragile, an artifact from a time long past, centuries ago, back in the late 2000s. It was a photo taken in New York City. In the picture stood 3 figures at the center: herself, Fu, and Naruto. But surrounding them were their mortal friends, Ted Mosby, Marshall Erickson, Lily Aldrin, Robin Scherbatsky. She thought that's how it was pronounced, but it didn't matter. She was Canadian, and lastly, Barney Stinson. A small chuckle escaped her lips as she thought about the old running joke about making fun of Canada. Robin never liked it, but the jokes never stopped. Her amusement deepened when she thought about Barney. That perverted, suit-obsessed idiot. He was a legend in his own right. She could still hear his ridiculous catchphrases, the way he always found some over-the-top, insane scheme to get laid. It was stupid. It was ridiculous. But damn, it was funny. Legend. Wait for it, Derry. Akane sighed, her expression softening. She missed those days. The laughter, the stupidity, the absurdity of their mortal lives. A voice broke her out of her thoughts. "What's wrong, Akane?" She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting the towering figure of Fulgrim. His elegant, inhumanly perfect face studied her with curiosity. The Phoenician, the primarch of the Emperor's children, stood behind her with his usual grace, His arms crossed as he observed her with keen interest. Akane let out a small breath and turned her gaze back to the picture. I was reminiscing about the past. Fulgrith, the female clone of Fulgrim, stepped closer, her elegant yet inhumanly precise movements betraying her Primarch heritage. Her violet eyes, sharp and full of curiosity, flicked to the old photograph in Akane's hands. "What is that?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Akane glanced at the picture again before holding it up for Fulgrith to see. "It's a piece of the past. A relic from a time when things were simpler." Fulgrith arched a delicate brow. "You speak as if that time mattered more than the present." Akane chuckled, her golden eyes shimmering with nostalgia. "Because it does, in a way. Back then, Naruto, Fu, and I weren't gods of war. We weren't symbols of an empire. We were just people. Mortals living life, making friends, being stupid, and enjoying the little things." Fulgrith crossed her arms, intrigued. "Tell me about them." Akane smiled. It wasn't often she got to talk about the past with someone who actually wanted to listen. She motioned for Fulgrith to sit with her on the stone bench nearby. The Primarch clone hesitated for a moment before complying, her curiosity outweighing her usual aloofness. Akane took a breath and tapped the faces in the photo. "This one here is Ted Mosby," she said, pointing to the man with messy brown hair. The guy was an architect, bit of a hopeless romantic. Always chasing the one, and telling long-ass stories to his kids about how he met their mother. She smirked. "Seriously, I swear he turned it into a whole damn saga." Fulgrith gave a small hum. "A storyteller? A dreamer?" Akane nodded. "Yeah, but also a bit of a dumbass. He had a bad habit of overanalyzing everything. But he was a good guy." She tapped the next person. "Marshall Erickson, a giant teddy bear of a man. He was a lawyer, but all he wanted to do was save the environment. Big, goofy, soft-hearted, but don't ever mess with his loved ones. He'd throw down if needed." Fulgrith tilted her head. "A warrior bound by love and justice." Akane laughed. "Something like that." She moved her finger. "Lily Aldrin, Marshall's wife. Tiny but terrifying. She was the schemer of the group, always plotting, always meddling. Sweet when she wanted to be, but also had a scary side." Fulgrith smirked. "A tactician, then?" Akane chuckled. "Yeah, but more of a social manipulator than a battlefield commander." She pointed next to Robin. "Robin Sherbatsky. Canadian." She grinned. "Which means we made fun of her a lot." Fulgrith raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Akane waved it off. "It's just what you do." But she was a news anchor, tough as nails, independent, didn't like getting tied down. She had a thing for guns, whiskey, and hockey. "A warrior at heart," Fulgrith observed. Akane nodded. "Pretty much." Finally, she tapped the last person in the picture. "And this idiot, Barney Stinson." Fulgrith narrowed her eyes slightly. "And what was his role?" Akane smirked. "Legendary." "Excuse me?" She laughed. "That was his thing. Everything had to be legend. Wait for it, dairy. He was a womanizer, a schemer, and a total lunatic, but he was also one of the most loyal friends anyone could ask for." Fulgrith leaned back slightly, taking it all in. "A rogue, then. A manipulator, but bound by loyalty." Akane nodded. "Yeah, and he was hilarious. He came up with the most ridiculous plans just to get laid, but he also had moments where he showed he actually cared." She sighed, her smile softening. "He was an idiot, but he was our idiot." Fulgrith studied her expression for a moment before speaking again. "You miss them." Akane nodded. "More than I can put into words." She ran her fingers over the picture, her voice growing quieter. "It's been millennia. I don't even know where their souls went. Maybe they got reincarnated. Maybe they're lost in the warp. Maybe they're just gone." Fulgrith was silent for a moment before speaking. It is rare to hear of Terra's past in such a personal way. "You, Naruto, and Fu, despite all your power, you were once a part of that world." "It is fascinating." Akane chuckled. "You're the first person in a long time to actually care about that history." She looked at Fulgrith and smirked. "Maybe you're not as cold as you pretend to be." Fulgrith scoffed but said nothing. The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of time pressing upon them. For Akane, it was a rare moment of peace. Even in the grim darkness of the future, some things were worth remembering. Flashback. McLaren's Pub, 2006. The familiar hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the distant sound of music filled McLaren's pub as Naruto and Akane strolled inside. The warm glow of the bar's lighting cast a nostalgic haze over the place. In their usual booth sat the gang: Marshall, Ted, Robin, Lily, Barney, and Fu. As soon as Naruto and Akane arrived, Marshall grinned widely and threw his arms out dramatically. "Ah, the ancient and powerful beings have arrived," he declared in a mock Shakespearean tone. Ted joined in, smirking. "Tell us, O wise immortals, what wisdom have thee gained in the countless centuries of thy existence?" Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. "That you guys are still just as weird as the day we met." Akane rolled her eyes, sliding into the booth. "And that Marshall's jokes haven't gotten any better." Fu giggled, taking a sip of her drink. As always, Barney was in full Barney mode, his eyes scanning the bar until they landed on a woman who had just walked in. His gaze sharpened, and his analytical skills kicked in. Mid to late 20s, confident stride, fake wedding ring. Probably uses it to avoid unwanted advances but secretly wants to be chased. Bust size. C cup, give or take. Based on her outfit, works in a corporate office, most likely HR, meaning she deals with people all day and just wants to let loose tonight. Akane scoffed. "You can't seriously think you're going to get her just by looking at her." Barney turned to her with a devilish grin. "Challenge accepted." Akane blinked. "I was kidding. You don't have to." Too late. Barney was already strutting toward the woman with absolute confidence. Akane sighed, rubbing her temples. Meanwhile, Marshall turned to Naruto, his expression filled with hope. "Okay, but for real, Bigfoot. Is he real?" Naruto sighed, shaking his head. "No, Marshall. Bigfoot isn't real." Marshall visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping in disappointment. Lily patted his back sympathetically. "But," Naruto added, smirking slightly, "the Loch Ness Monster is real." Marshall's head shot up, eyes wide. "Seriously?" Naruto nodded. "Not a monster, though. Just a surviving plesiosaur that adapted to deep, cold waters." Marshall's face lit up with pure joy. He pumped his fist in the air. "Yes, vindication." The group chuckled at his excitement before shifting their attention back to Barney. Robin leaned forward, arms crossed. "There is no way whatever ridiculous move Barney pulls is actually going to work." Ted nodded in agreement. "Yeah, what woman in her right mind would just..." Before he could finish, they all watched in stunned silence as the woman actually smiled, engaged in conversation with Barney, and, within moments, started laughing. Then, to everyone's shock, she grabbed his arm, and the two of them headed for the door. Barney turned back just before leaving, flashing the group a wise smirk and a peace sign. Akane's jaw dropped. "That son of a bitch did it." She turned to the others. "Okay, seriously. Does he have a power, or is everyone just stupid?" Ted considered it for a moment. "Honestly? Probably both." Everyone nodded in agreement. Ash lay still, his arms wrapped loosely around Puka as she rested atop him. Her breathing was soft, her body relaxed against his, and a serene smile touched her lips as she slept. Gently, he reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open, warm and affectionate as they met his. Their lips met in a tender, passionate kiss, slow and lingering, a silent exchange of love and understanding. Ash loved her deeply. Every curve, every scar, every moment that shaped her into the woman she was. Puka chuckled softly, a memory surfacing in her mind. "You know," she murmured, resting her head against his chest, "millennia ago, before the age of strife. I tried dating." She smiled, though there was a tinge of amusement and exasperation. "It always took about 2 seconds for some boy to look straight at my chest. That's when I'd kick them in the balls." Ash chuckled lightly, his hand smoothing down her back. "Sounds like they deserved it." Her smile widened. "But then I met you. Stubborn, mouthy. A total jackass." She laughed. "I still remember the first time you spoke back to me. The guardsmen and even the space marines were stunned. You actually called me a pop culture little bitch." Ash smirked, not ashamed in the least. "Well, someone had to keep you grounded." Puka sighed, her fingers tracing idle patterns across his chest. "After the Imperium was formed, people started seeing me as a princess, a demi-goddess. It sounded amazing, but it was lonely." She glanced up at him, her gaze softening. "But you were different. You didn't care about titles or power. You saw me. She paused, a hint of self-consciousness crossing her features. And after my sister joined the heresy, I kind of let myself go. I got a little plump again. Curvy, I guess, but not like I was. She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Some of my younger siblings, the ones born in the 2000s, used to call me Super Pachaco. It was mortifying back then. Ash chuckled, his hand coming up to cradle her face. I remember Super Pachaco, but I don't care about any of that. You're beautiful, Puka. Always have been, always will be. He kissed her forehead, his voice low and sincere. And honestly, I kinda like the idea of having my own real-life Super Pachaco. Makes me feel like living pop culture anime girl in real life. Puka's laugh was soft, warm, and genuine. She nestled closer, her worries melting beneath his affection. You're such a nerd, she whispered. And you're mine, he replied, holding her tighter. Kazuki's voice echoed from the doorway, his tone light and teasing. Guess you've embraced being Super Pachaco, huh? Puka's eyes shot open in shock, her body jolting upright as she saw her brother standing there. In a comical panic, she scrambled to cover herself, only to slip off the bed entirely. She hit the floor with a soft thud, the sheet sliding off her body as she ended up upside down, her legs sprawled awkwardly. Kazuki's gaze didn't falter, though there was no perversion in his look, just casual curiosity. Never understood why some women sometime their pubes are shape of heart. Always seemed like a lot of effort. Puka's face burned crimson. She shot upright, yanking the sheet around herself, glaring daggers at him. Kazuki, for fuck's sake, ever heard of knocking? It's been millennia, and you still don't knock? He just shrugged, as nonchalant as ever. You know how I am. Gritting her teeth, she narrowed her eyes. What the hell do you want? Kazuki's face grew serious. Dad's coming, and Mom too. Her breath caught, and she froze, the world seeming to stand still for a heartbeat. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. Kazuki nodded, understanding the weight of her reaction. It's been 10,000 years. I know it's been hard. He was sealed, and you only saw him once after his release. But, it's happening. He'll be here soon, and so will our siblings. Uncle Gilliman and Johnson are coming too. With that, Kazuki gave her one final, understanding look before turning and leaving the room. Puka stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest, emotions swirling. She felt Ash's arms wrapped gently around her from behind, his warmth grounding her. His lips pressed softly to her shoulder. He'll be happy to see you, Ash murmured, his voice reassuring. Puka sighed, leaning into his touch. I know, but Mom and Dad, they'll be worried. She glanced down at herself. Seeing me like this, plump and... Ash chuckled, his arms tightening slightly. Plump? His lips brushed against her neck, his breath warm. You look delicious enough to eat. Her heart fluttered as his hands slid along her waist, holding her close. He whispered against her ear, his voice low and teasing, tender and soft. I want more of you. A shiver ran down her spine, desire mingling with affection. She smirked slightly, her eyes gleaming. Feeling something press against her from behind, she chuckled. Already poking me, huh? Ash just grinned. Can you blame me? Puka's laughter was soft, genuine. She turned her head, meeting his lips in a slow, hungry kiss, embracing the comfort he offered. For now, she'd let herself be wrapped in this warmth, before facing the storm of emotions that came with her father's return. In space, Gloria-class battleship, Maelstrom. The Maelstrom cruised silently through the cold void of space, its crimson and gold hull gleaming under the distant stars. The fox emblem of the Uzumaki clan was painted proudly along the prow, a symbol of strength and legacy. Unlike standard Imperial vessels, the Maelstrom bore designs from an age long past, the dark age of technology, its inner systems refined with ancient knowledge, granting it an edge over its more archaic counterparts. Naruto stood on the command deck, seated in the high-backed command chair. His eyes gazed out into the depths of space, thoughtful and unwavering. Panels of holographic screens hovered before him, data scrolling in ancient code as operators managed the ship's vast systems. The dim blue glow of the bridge's projectors reflected off his face, highlighting the solemnity in his expression. The heavy bridge doors hissed open, the sound sharp in the silence. Two sentinels stood guard, their armor a shade of red just lighter than the Blood Angels, a hue bordering on orange, symbolizing their Uzumaki lineage. One was male, the other female, both towering in their power armor, their fox-crested helmets tucked beneath their arms. They saluted, fists thumping against their chests in respect. Following them were Yoruichi, Rangaku, and Akane. Rangaku approached first, her steps light yet purposeful. Her outfit was a unique evolution of her Soul Reaper garb, tailored with red linings representing her bond to the Uzumaki clan. The fabric shimmered with enhanced materials, durable enough for war but soft enough for comfort. Despite centuries of change, the window to her infamous cleavage remained, a bold symbol of her unshaken confidence. She leaned down, her fingers brushing tenderly against Naruto's cheek. A small, teasing smile played on her lips, but Naruto's somber expression remained unmoved. He sighed deeply, though his hand rose to touch hers, in acknowledgement of her affection. "I know you're trying to flirt, Rangaku," he murmured, voice low. "But there's a lot on my mind." Yoruichi stepped closer, her amber eyes softening as she placed a comforting hand on Naruto's shoulder. "We understand, Naruto. We're about to see our children again after so long. It's a lot to process." Akane stood to the side, her foxtail swaying slowly, her expression unreadable as she stared out the viewport. The journey ahead weighed on all of them. Naruto gave a small nod, though his gaze didn't waver from the stars. "It's not just that. I've sensed something off. The pocket dimension. The webway we stayed in, it felt unstable. Chaos was leaking, moving. And when we left, I still felt it, faint but present." His voice grew quieter. "I fear it's leaking into my home universe." The words settled over them like a heavy shroud. Naruto's mind churned with theories, possibilities, and consequences. He'd spoken to Gilliman and Johnson about it, weighing the risks. But it remained an enigma, a shadow lurking on the edge of his thoughts. Rangaku, however, tried to lighten the mood. She clapped her hands together, her eyes gleaming. "Well, I'm excited to see my granddaughter. I'm going to spoil her rotten." There was an awkward pause. The crew around the bridge exchanged glances. The female Space Marine pawned her helmeted forehead while the male gave a subtle shake of his head. Even Yoruichi rolled her eyes, though with fond amusement. "Rangaku," Akane drawled, "you do remember that your granddaughter is over 50, right? She just looks like she's in her 20s because of our bloodline." Rangaku blinked, then laughed, waving it off. "50 or not, she's still my sweet little girl. And I'm going to treat her like one." A collective sweat drop metaphorically hung over the crew. Rangaku was a fierce warrior, a legend in battle. But moments like these reminded them that she could be, well, an idiot. Naruto chuckled under his breath, the sound dry but genuine. Even amid the looming storm of thoughts, Rangaku's antics were a strange comfort. "Just don't suffocate her," Naruto said, finally turning to face his wives fully. "She's probably already preparing for our arrival." Akane's tail flicked thoughtfully. "And probably worried." Naruto nodded slowly, his eyes shadowed. "We all are." Silence fell again, heavy with the weight of past memories and uncertain futures. Yet, despite the lingering darkness of chaos and the vastness of space, there was something solid among them: family. An ancient bond that endured millennia. And soon, they would be whole again. Naruto's old home universe. In the shadowed depths of the elemental nations, where the light of day dared not touch, a cavern yawned open beneath the roots of the world. Flickering candlelight cast haunting silhouettes upon the jagged walls, the flames dancing as if in ritual themselves. The air was thick, stale with the scent of old blood, iron, and rot. Within that cavern, hundreds gathered. Cloaked figures, their hoods low and their faces hidden, stood in a circle upon a floor etched with symbols drawn from ancient blood. The metallic scent clung to the stones, soaked deep into the earth beneath their feet. In the center of this grim congregation rose a mountain of corpses, men, women, children, even infants. Their bodies, torn and broken, offered in grim sacrifice to a hunger that would never be sated. The cultists' whispers grew into a low chant, a wave of sound that echoed against the walls and trembled through the cavern. "Blood for the blood god. Skulls for the throne of corn." The chant repeated, again and again, their voices gaining strength with every syllable. The air pulsed with dark energy, a foul magic drawn from pain, war, and suffering. The blood lining the cavern's ancient symbols began to bubble, glowing faintly as if answering the call of something beyond the veil of reality. Chaos. It had found a foothold, a crack in the world. It had seeped into the elemental nations, feeding off the endless cycle of conflict. The wars of clans, the death of shinobi, the rivers of blood spilled over generations. This world was ripe for corruption. For Khorne, the god of war and bloodshed, it was a paradise of carnage waiting to be claimed. And the cultists were only the beginning. Soon, they would spill out from their dark places, their numbers swelling with every soul claimed and every enemy butchered. Their faith in Khorne, their devotion to endless slaughter, would grant them power. Yet even now, it was not enough. Not yet. The whispered words of their high priest, cloaked in crimson stained darker by age and sacrifice, rang through the cavern. The blood god's gaze is upon us, but his thirst is endless. This land, it will not be enough. We must seek a place of fire, of rage, of warriors who crave strength and blood as we do. There, we will forge an altar worthy of Khorne's gaze. A vision formed in their minds, an inferno of a world, where the weak were crushed beneath the strong, where war was eternal and fire consumed all. A place where their god's strength could grow boundless. The priest raised a jagged, bone-carved blade, its edges dripping with fresh blood. We will burn this world, and the next, until the skies themselves run red. We will open the path, and Khorne shall march. The chant roared louder, shaking the earth. Blood for the blood god. Skulls for the throne of Khorne. And somewhere beyond the veil, a dark presence stirred, its rage reaching across dimensions, drawn to the scent of war and fire. Its hunger would soon find a feast. Unless someone could stop it. Konohagakure. The Namikaze household was heavy with silence, the kind that clung to the walls and seeped into the floorboards like a lingering shadow. Dust motes floated in the slivers of light breaking through curtained windows, illuminating a home that had long forgotten laughter and warmth. Kushina Uzumaki walked slowly up the stairs, her steps light but weary, as though the very act of moving weighed her down. The air felt colder here, especially as she approached the hallway that led to the room she feared yet longed to see. She paused, her hand brushing along the wall, fingertips tracing invisible memories. Naruto's room. It stood untouched, exactly as it had been for the last 13 years. The bed still made, the shelves lined with old, forgotten toys, and faded pictures that had begun to curl at the edges. She pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. It was empty, and always would be. Kushina stepped inside, the familiar scent of dust and old wood greeting her like an old wound reopening. Her gaze wandered, landing on the simple bed where her son had once slept. Memories surged, his laughter, his small hands reaching for her, his innocent voice calling her, Mama. But then came the darker memories. The ones that haunted her when she closed her eyes. Her hand drifted to her lower abdomen, fingers splaying over the scar that marked more than just flesh. It was a reminder of pain, of punishment, of betrayal. She still remembered the whisper that had echoed in her ear when the blade pierced her, cutting deeper than flesh. This is your punishment, for being a blood traitor. Be thankful you can still carry the shame of your choices. That voice haunted her, a whisper from a face that belonged to the boy she had once cradled, once promised to love and protect. Her son. But Naruto had left, and with him, he had taken the light of her world. Kushina sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. Her hand traced the blanket, fingers trembling. She could almost imagine him still there, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the whispers that poisoned the village against him. Unaware of the hate that festered, fueled by fear and ignorance. And she had been blind to it. Blind until it was too late. She had heard them, the whispers, the cruel jokes. How they called her son a plague, a disease, a demon. She had even heard them say they wished pain upon him, wished suffering on his birthday, the day that should have been his celebration of life. And she had done nothing. She thought she had been protecting him, but she had only turned away. Now, she suffered her punishment. Even the medicines she took could not dull the ache. No potion could ease the hollowness that had settled deep inside her. Not when Menma, her remaining son, grew arrogant and distant. When he flaunted his status, reveling in the attention the village lavished upon him. And her friends, her closest allies, they had drifted, torn apart by tragedy. Makoto was gone, murdered, her clan wiped out by her own son. Only Satsuki and Sasuke survived, their eyes shadowed by loss and betrayal. Kushina had tried to reach out, But Satsuki's cold glare cut deeper than any blade. She understood that gaze. It mirrored her own pain. Kushina lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as tears slid down her cheeks, quiet and slow. Her hands clenched the fabric beneath her, clutching it as though she could still hold him close. "I'm sorry. Naruto," she whispered, the words fragile as glass. "I'm so sorry." But apologies meant nothing now. The room remained silent, empty. Cold, just like her heart. Rick and Morty universe. In the garage, the familiar buzz of tools and the smell of burning metal filled the air as Rick worked on some bizarre, half-finished device. Sparks flew as he wielded a blowtorch, casually muttering to himself. Across the room, Naruto and Morty sat at a cluttered table, each focused on painting their Warhammer 40k miniatures. Morty was carefully brushing red onto his blood angel, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, while Naruto added the finishing details to her ultramarine. The silence was comfortable until Morty broke it. "Hey, Rick?" Morty asked, still focused on his model. Do you think we'll ever, actually go to the Warhammer 40k universe? You know, just for fun?" Rick didn't even look up, the blowtorch still flaring in his hand. "Doubt it, Morty. Pretty sure we already crossed over with My Little Pony at some point, so the bar's kinda low. Next thing you know, we're getting our asses handed to us by pastel horses with friendship lasers." Naruto froze mid-brush stroke, her blue-painted ultramarine held in the air. She slowly turned to Rick, eyebrow raised. "That's weirdly specific. Too specific." Rick snorted, shutting off the blowtorch with a sharp hiss. "What can I say? Just giving the readers what they want." Morty blinked, confused, his brush pausing over the miniature's shoulder pad. Readers?" The void burned with fire and fury as the battle unfolded. A great predator of the Imperium's past, a relic of the Great Crusade, now clashed against the horrors of the present. The Auric Sovereign, a Gloriana-class battleship, loomed over the battlefield, its white and gold-lined hull illuminated by the inferno of war. A majestic dragon emblem, reminiscent of the heraldry from ancient Terran knightly orders, was carved into its prow. It was the flagship of John Sturban, Primarch of the Second Legion, the White Avalon, once known as the Architect of Unity, the Eagle Ascendant, the Warden of Order, and the Argent Sovereign. Yet now, no matter his titles or his legacy, his enemies would not falter. Alongside his mighty warship, Imperial battle cruisers unleashed their wrath, broadsides of macro cannons and lance batteries searing through the void. The battle raged near the Auric Rift, a passage that, if left unguarded, would allow the Tyranid swarm a direct path toward Terra itself. The war for humanity's future. On the Auric Sovereign's command deck, John Sturban stood tall, observing the strategic hololith before him. Once, his face had been that of an idealistic warrior philosopher, a man who sought to forge alliances and bring reason to the Imperium. Now, he bore the weight of millennia, his once sharp features lined with the burdens of war, a short beard framing his determined visage. His eyes, once full of youthful hope, were now hardened by the reality of endless conflict. Yet even in the face of despair, his resolve remained unbroken. He still believed in his father's dream. "Status," he commanded, his voice firm yet weary. A female Argent Eagle, her power armor bearing the sigil of his legion, stepped forward. "The Tyranids are advancing in coordinated formations, my lord. The fleet has engaged, but we estimate they'll breach our line in 70 standard minutes if we don't adjust positioning." John nodded, fingers tracing over the tactical display. His spies had predicted this swarm's trajectory long before it became a threat, yet the greater Imperium had failed to act. "So once again, it falls to us." His golden eyes flickered toward the massive bioships on the display. The Tyranids did not waver, did not hesitate. Their will was absolute, their hunger eternal. The sheer numbers meant that the war of attrition would eventually favor them. But he would not allow them to advance toward Holy Terra. Reroute Argent Valor and Pax Imperialis to reinforce the left flank. "Bring Celestial Hammer and Aegis Prime to the center line," John ordered. "Their objective is to hold. We will not cede a single meter of space." The officers saluted and relayed his orders. John had spent his life ensuring his forces were more than warriors, they were builders, thinkers, defenders. And today, they would hold the line not just as soldiers, but as the shield of the Imperium. The void trembled as Tyranid bioships advanced, Their grotesque, chitinous hulls absorbing punishment from Imperial bombardment before retaliating with biomechanical weaponry. Gigantic capillary towers pulsed with eerie, greenish light as they unleashed acidic torpedoes that melted through void shields, leaving ships exposed to boarding organisms and massive living projectiles. The first ship to be completely overwhelmed was Vigilant Resolve, a lunar-class cruiser that had served in the Aurum Expanse for over a century. The Tyranids enveloped it, tearing it apart, sending thousands of crew members screaming into the abyss. John did not flinch. His mind processed every loss, every sacrifice. All ships, adjust targeting vectors. Prioritize the Hive Tyrant vessels. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. And then, the great beast arrived. From the darkness beyond the rift, a massive hive ship emerged, its sheer size dwarfing the Auric Sovereign itself. Its horrific, multi-eyed visage seemed to stare into the souls of those who dared oppose it, its psychic presence clawing at the minds of Imperial warriors. John's grip tightened on the command railing. It's trying to break us. But it will learn that we are not so easily broken. His mind worked faster than any mortal strategist could fathom. The Argent Eagles were not just warriors, they were architects, engineers, masters of logistics. He had taught them to build as well as destroy. And now, it was time to construct a victory from the wreckage of war. "Signal the fleet," John declared. "We are going to cut off the head of the beast." A captain hesitated. "My lord, engaging it directly could." "Could what?" John interjected. "Risk our forces? We are already at risk. But if we hesitate, we lose. Today, we decide whether the Imperium remains the architect of the stars, or its prey." The order was given, and the fleet charged forward. As the void erupted into a maelstrom of destruction, John Sturban stood firm. The Imperium was fractured, broken by time, war, and politics. His father's dream had become twisted, its architects long dead or forgotten. But he was still here. And as long as he drew breath, the Imperium would not fall. The battle for the Auric Rift had begun. The void was alight with the fires of war. The once empty blackness of space had become a swirling tempest of destruction, filled with the flashing brilliance of lance batteries, the roar of macro-cannon volleys, and the sickly bioluminescence of Tyranid organic weaponry. The Imperium fought with discipline and fury, every ship maneuvering with precision, every attack crafted with deadly intent. But the Tyranids cared nothing for strategy in the way mortals understood it. They did not fear, they did not hesitate, and they did not retreat. Their ships were living nightmares, void-spawned leviathans bred for one purpose, consumption. And they were closing in. The swarm descends. Attack craft screamed through the void, dogfights erupting between Imperial interceptors and Tyranid bio-drones. The dark prowlers, sleek Tyranid attack organisms, darted through the chaos, their fleshy wings pulsing as they vomited globs of acidic ichor onto the hulls of Imperial fighters. The corrosive fluid ate through ceramite and adamantium, dissolving ships mid-flight and leaving behind nothing but drifting, lifeless wreckage. The Void Fiends, monstrous creatures the size of light cruisers, pulsed with raw synaptic energy, guiding swarms of vanguard drone ships. Flesh-bound constructs that resembled swarming nests of living missiles. These drones weaved between the Imperium's fighter screens, their sharpened bone spurs impaling anything in their path. Inside one of the Imperial squadrons, Lieutenant Adric Kane fought to hold formation. His Thunderhawk swerved hard to avoid a spray of bioplasma, the greenish fire licking at the hull. His squadron, Sablewing, had already lost half its numbers. "Hold the line," Kane roared through the Vox. "Target the prowlers first, clear the intercept lanes." A blood-curdling shriek filled his ears as a Vanguard drone ship latched onto one of his wingmates, drilling its needle like proboscis straight through the pit. The fighter twitched violently before detonating, sending shards of metal and frozen blood scattering through space. "Emperor preserve us," Kane muttered, but he didn't hesitate. His craft rolled, firing twin-linked lascannons into the center mass of the nearest Void Fiend. The shots seared through its chitinous hide, forcing it to writhe in pain. But it was far from dead. More Tyranid bioships surged forward, and the Imperium's fighter squadrons met them in brutal, close-quarters engagements. The swarm was endless. The line begins to crack. On the bridge of the Auric Sovereign, John Sturban watched as the swarm threatened to overwhelm the fleet. His Argent Eagles fought with the discipline of an iron-willed order, but even they could not stem the tide alone. "Reinforce the outer formations," he barked. "Deploy the remaining boarding torpedoes. We take the fight to them." Throughout the fleet, torpedo tubes opened, launching heavily armored boarding craft straight into the largest Tyranid bioships. The Argent Eagles, clad in Mark IV and Mark X power armor, prepared themselves for battle in the only way they knew how, by charging straight into the maw of the beast. Inside the Tyranid hive ship, Captain Darius Vex of the Argent Eagles crashed into the interior of the Tyranid Leviathan, his boots sinking slightly into the sickly, pulsating flesh beneath him. Around him, his brothers emerged from the wrecked torpedo pod, bolters raised, flamers igniting. The hive ship was a living nightmare. Veins pulsed across the fleshy corridors, secreting mucus that clung to the Marine's armor. Organic vents opened and closed with every breath, releasing clouds of spores that hissed against their helmets. The walls twitched as if reacting to their presence. Vex didn't waste time. "Burn it all," he commanded. With a hiss, his flamer roared to life, spewing liquid promethium into the walls. The biomatter screamed, recoiling from the fire, but the hive ship began shifting in response. From the dark corridors ahead, shapes emerged. Tyranid warriors, their talons dripping with venom, their eyes glowing with cruel intelligence. The fight began in earnest. Vex fired his plasma pistol, the bolt of superheated energy melting through a warrior's skull. His squad moved like a well-oiled machine, chainswords revved, tearing through flesh and bone, while bolters spat death into the advancing horde. But the hive ship was alive. It felt their presence, and it would not die so easily. Back in space, the Auric Sovereign's guns roared as it dueled with the Tyrant of the Void. The hive ship's tendrils lashed out, embedding themselves into the hull of an Imperial cruiser, Resolute Will. The living weaponry pulsed, pumping digestive acids into the ship's structure, causing entire decks to collapse as crew members were liquefied inside their compartments. John Sturban clenched his jaw. "Target all lance batteries on the primary hive ship," he ordered. From the Sovereign's flanks, massive lance beams erupted, cutting through the darkness and striking the Tyrant of the Void with pinpoint accuracy. Chitinous plates cracked, boiling flesh spilling into space, but the hive ship refused to die. Instead, it retaliated. A sudden psychic wave burst from the hive ship, a synaptic scream so powerful that even the Argent Eagles on board staggered. Lesser crew members collapsed, their minds shattered by the alien will that sought to crush them. Sturban held firm. His Primarch mind was powerful, more than powerful enough to resist the intrusion. But even he could feel the monstrous intellect pressing against his own. "You will not take this sector," he growled. Then he gave the final order. The death of the beast. Aboard the Tyranid hive ship, Vex and his squad had fought their way to the core. A massive, pulsating organ lay before them, the heart of the beast. If they could destroy it, the entire hive ship would collapse. "Set charges," Vex ordered. His men worked quickly, planting melta bombs along the grotesque structure. But the hive ship knew. It felt their actions. The walls screamed, and from the darkness, a massive Carnifex barreled forward, its claws as large as a space marine. Vex didn't hesitate. For the Argent Eagles, he roared, raising his chainsword and meeting the beast head-on. The Carnifex swung, but Vex ducked, rolling beneath its attack and firing his plasma pistol into its exposed underbelly. The bolt of energy burned through flesh, but the beast was not dead. It turned, roaring, preparing to strike. The melta bombs detonated. A shockwave ripped through the hive ship, sending biomatter flying in all directions. The Argent Eagles ran, sprinting back to their boarding torpedo as the entire vessel began to collapse. Outside, the Auric Sovereign fired its final salvo. The hive ship, already weakened from within, could take no more. It exploded in a blinding wave of fire and psychic energy, the remains scattering across the void. The Tyranids faltered. The Imperium had won, but Sturban did not smile. There was no victory against the Tyranids. There was only survival. He turned his gaze to the darkness beyond the battlefield. And he wondered, how long until the next swarm came? The air inside the ship still carried the scent of battle. Ozone from spent plasma charges, the acrid bite of burnt flesh, and the lingering stench of Tyranid ichor. The halls of the Auric Sovereign were alive with the sounds of the aftermath. Wounded being treated, servitors cleaning away bloodstains, and the murmured prayers of the faithful. The price of victory was always steep. John Sturban sighed as he left the bridge, his mind heavy with the names of the fallen. His sons had fought bravely, and many had given their lives to hold the line. But they had succeeded. The Tyranid advance had been halted. For now, as he walked through the ship's dimly lit corridors, his golden-lined white cloak flowed behind him, the Argent Eagle sigil on his armor catching the artificial light. Crew members and guardsmen lined the halls, acknowledging his presence in the way they always did. Some thumped their fists to their chests in salute, others knelt as he passed. He had long since grown weary of it. To them, he was more than just their leader. He was a Primarch, one of the Emperor's own sons, a demigod in their eyes. But John had never seen himself that way. He was not a deity, nor was he infallible. He bled, he suffered, and he carried the burdens of command just as any man would. Yet no matter how often he insisted they stand as equals, the Imperium's reverence for the Primarchs was too deeply ingrained. He exhaled softly and continued onward, his steps steady as he made his way toward the hangar bay. Upon entering, the sight before him was one of grim efficiency. A massive pile of dead Tyranids was being set ablaze, their twisted bodies curling as the purifying flames consumed them. Flamer troops methodically ensured that every corpse was accounted for. Any sign of lingering Xenos corruption had to be eradicated without mercy. John approached a squad of his Argent Eagles overseeing the process. Their armor, once pristine white, was now stained with gore and ichor. One of them, his helmet tucked under his arm, turned and saluted. "Every last Xeno accounted for, my lord," the Marine reported. "And with all due respect, we owe much of our survival to Princess Alexandra." John turned his gaze toward the lone figure seated on a crate nearby. Alexandra Uzumaki. She sat with her sword resting across her knees, methodically cleaning the blade. It was stained black with the remains of the Tyranids she had cut down, far too many for even a Primarch to count. The hangar lights reflected off her blood-soaked uniform, her long red hair matted with filth and sweat. Yet despite the carnage surrounding her, she was composed, almost serene. John studied her face, noting the exhaustion in her blue sky eyes, the same eyes she had inherited from her father. She had lived for millennia, watching humanity rise and fall, fighting beside them and against their enemies since before the Imperium had even been born. And yet, despite her near-eternal existence, there was something undeniably human in the way she sat there, tired but unwavering. A shadow of concern flickered across his mind. She had been pushing herself too hard lately. Not just in battle, but in spirit. His gaze shifted as another figure approached her, Captain Tobias Cruz, a veteran guardsman of the 121st Orem Dragoons. His uniform was marked with the signs of battle, his face bearing the scars of countless campaigns. Alexandra looked up as he neared, her cold expression softening ever so slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but John saw it. The small flicker of warmth in her eyes, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips. She had found someone who could make her smile. It was a rare thing. And for that, John was silently grateful. Without interrupting, he turned away and walked back toward the corridors of the ship. There was still much to be done. As he made his way through the hallways, the salutes and kneeling continued. Pilots, officers, ship crew, some pounded their chests in reverence, others bent the knee as if in the presence of a god. He mentally sighed. He understood their loyalty, their reverence. It was the way of the Imperium, the way the Emperor had forged their beliefs. To them, he was not merely a commander, he was divine. But he had never wanted that. He was not like his more zealous brothers, who embraced their godhood in the eyes of their warriors. He had never desired to be worshipped. He was a soldier, a leader, and nothing more. "Rise," he said softly to a kneeling officer, a junior deck lieutenant who had dropped to one knee as John passed. The young man hesitated but obeyed, standing quickly, his hands trembling slightly at having been addressed directly by a Primarch. John offered a nod before continuing onward. He knew that, in their eyes, he would always be something more than human. But he would do everything in his power to remind them that, above all else, they were in this fight together. As equals. John leaned back in his command chair as the bridge settled into a steady hum of activity. The battle had ended, but there was always more work to be done. He let himself exhale, the weight of command pressing upon him as the stars drifted outside the viewport like endless watchful eyes. Then, a sharp beep echoed through the deck. One of the control staff turned toward him, standing at attention. "My lord, we are receiving a priority transmission from Terra," the officer reported. John straightened. "Put it through." The hollow projector flickered to life, and within moments, the translucent, blue-tinged figure of Naruto Uzumaki stood before him. John couldn't help but smile at the sight of his elder brother. Naruto's golden hair was slightly longer than the last time John had seen him, a few strands hanging loosely over his forehead protector. His face still carried that youthful defiance, despite the weight of millennia. Beside him, another figure appeared, Fu Uzumaki, their sister. Her kind, gentle smile softened the room's atmosphere almost immediately. "Brother," John greeted warmly. "Sister. It's good to see you both." Fu's smile brightened. "And you as well, little brother. We've missed you." John chuckled. "What brings me of this call?" Naruto folded his arms, his grin widening. "I'm gathering the family at Uzu Prime. It's been too long. I want you to come back, see Alexandra, see the others." John blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected that. A family gathering was rare. But then again, time meant little to them. Even after millennia, bonds held strong. His expression softened and he nodded. "I understand. I'd be glad to see you all again." Naruto smirked. "Who knows? Maybe we can finish our little games." John scoffed. "I assume you mean that ridiculous competition of yours? I would have thought after all these years, you'd finally let that nonsense go." Naruto's grin turned mischievous. "Come on, John. Even after a millennium, I'm still young and strong. Can't say the same about you." John sighed, shaking his head with an amused smile. "Says the man who didn't even sense an entire Tyranid fleet heading to Terra. I thought your mind was as sharp as the ages." Naruto snorted. "Says the man who fell down a cliff." John's eyes widened in mock offense. "Because you pushed me off a cliff." The memory played vividly in his mind, him tumbling down a mountainside, cursing, while Naruto laughed at the top like a damn lunatic. Before the bantering could escalate further, Fu exhaled loudly, rubbing her temples. "Enough stupidity. I refuse to listen to another one of your endless competitions." Both demigods sighed like scolded children and nodded. The crew, both mortal and Astartes, watched the exchange with amusement. Though their lord was a Primarch, moments like this reminded them that he was still a man. There was something wholesome about Lady Fu's kindness and compassion. She had a way of taming even the greatest warriors. As the transmission cut off and the fleet adjusted course toward Uzu Prime, John sat in silence for a moment. His mind drifted to Fu. She had always been different from the rest of them. While they were warriors, commanders, and rulers, she was a seeker of understanding. She didn't just want to know the Primarchs as warriors, she wanted to know them as people. What they loved, what made them happy. She wanted to understand their souls, not just their skills. It was one of the many reasons they all adored her. Even their father, complicated as he was, had never been able to deny her warmth. John's smile faded as another memory surfaced. Artoria Uzumaki, his niece, his firstborn niece, millennia older than even he was, yet she carried the face of a woman in her early 30s. Once, long ago, she had ruled over Terra itself, hiding her identity behind the name King Arthur. A king of legend, remembered throughout human history. She had been great, a warrior, a leader, a ruler who stood alongside her father and uncles at the dawn of the Imperium. And then she had fallen. Her descent into chaos had not been sudden, nor was it mindless. It was cold, calculated. The day she turned against them, half of his legion had followed her. John felt the old wounds ache as memories of that horrible war resurfaced. He had fought her. He had tried to stop her. She had chained him, beaten him, manipulated his sons. She was a ruler, a warrior, and a master of deception. She had cleaved through his loyalists without hesitation. And yet, despite everything, despite the war, the betrayal, the suffering, her death still haunted him. Not because of how she died, but because of who had killed her. Naruto. When John had finally escaped, leading the remnants of his broken legion to safety, he had learned the news. Artoria had fallen by her father's hands. He could still see Naruto's face when they met afterward, his brother's dead, hollow eyes, the blood on his hands. His daughter's blood, it had broken him. The past would never leave him. The ghosts of war never truly faded. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as the Auric Sovereign continued on its path toward Uzu Prime. For all their power, for all their godlike might, they still bore the wounds of time. But for now, at least for a moment, he would let himself look forward to seeing his family again. Back in her quarters, Alexandra Uzumaki stepped inside alongside Captain Tobias Cruz, her expression unreadable. The battle had been won, but the weight of it still clung to her like a shadow. She moved with tired precision, unbuttoning her uniform with slow, deliberate movements. Tobias, having already removed his armor, sat on the bed, watching her in quiet admiration. She shrugged off her upper uniform, revealing a black lace bra that contrasted against her scarred skin. Her body was a canvas of war. Old wounds stretched across her back, arms, and legs, each a story written in flesh. A particular scar, a deep sword wound across her stomach, caught her attention. She traced the old wound absent-mindedly, a silent reminder of her past, of the legacy she had lost. "Alex?" Tobias's voice was soft, pulling her from her thoughts. She blinked, meeting his gaze. His eyes held nothing but warmth, concern. She sighed, climbing onto the bed, pressing herself against him. His arms wrapped around her, his presence steady and comforting. Exhaustion clawed at her, dragging her down, but she welcomed it. Their lips met in a slow, intimate kiss, a rare moment of peace amidst the chaos of war. A faint smile graced her lips as she rested her head against his chest, letting her body relax. Then, as sleep began to claim her, she heard it. A whisper. "Alexandra." Her breath hitched. It was distant, yet uncomfortably close, curling into her ears like a serpent's hiss. "Tenebris." Her eyes fluttered open, her heart pounding. Darkness pressed against the edges of her vision. Tobias was still there, his breathing slow and steady, deep in sleep. But something else was here. A presence. Her fingers twitched toward the blade resting on the bedside table. The room was the same, yet different. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the dim emergency lumens, shifting like living things. And then she was no longer in her quarters. She was somewhere else. A different world. A different reality. Her hands were not resting on the bed. They were wrapped around something. Something struggling. She looked down. A creature. A pony, its orange coat marred by dirt and blood, gasped and kicked weakly in her grasp. His wings flailed, his blue mane clinging to his sweat-drenched face. His hooves scraped against her arm, desperate, pleading. His eyes were filled with terror. She knew this creature. His name was Flash Sentry. The realization hit her like a cold dagger, but her hands did not loosen. She could feel his throat beneath her fingers, the frantic beating of his heart. "Alexandra." The whisper was clearer now, deep and resounding. It echoed not just in her ears but in her very soul. "You cannot escape me." Her grip tightened. Flash Sentry's gasps turned to choked gurgles. His struggles weakened. His wings twitched erratically, then slowed. His hooves fell limp. A sickening crack. His body slumped. She released him, watching as he crumpled to the cobblestone floor. His lifeless eyes stared up at her, frozen in horror. The scent of ash filled her lungs. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, she saw it. Canterlot was burning. Flames devoured the grand city, its spires crumbling, its once proud banners torn and consumed by the inferno. The screams of its inhabitants were distant, drowned by the roaring fire. And then, she saw her, a figure standing amidst the destruction, watching. Tall, cloaked in shifting darkness, eyes like burning embers. Tenebris. Her lips curled into a twisted smile. "We have work to do, my dear Alexandra." Alexandra's breath came in short, panicked bursts. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But she could feel the heat of the flames. She could smell the burning flesh. She could still feel his throat breaking beneath her hands. And then, darkness. She bolted upright in her quarters, gasping. Tobias stirred beside her, groggy. "Alex? What's wrong?" Her hands trembled. Her breath was ragged. She looked down at them. They were clean. No blood. No broken flesh. But she still felt it. The weight of it. The voice echoed in the back of her mind. "We have work to do." That's all for my now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.